Chapter 1. The Heist. Zephyr crept through the shadows of the alien facility on Zeta Prime, his heart pounding in his chest. The sleek black walls seemed to pulse with an eerie blue light, and the air was thick with the hum of advanced technology. He knew that he was deep in enemy territory, and one wrong move could mean the end of his mission and his life. As he rounded a corner, Zephyr froze. Two alien guards stood blocking his path, their sleek insectoid armor gleaming in the dim light. Zephyr's hand tightened on his plasma rifle, but he knew that a firefight would only attract more attention. He needed to be smart about this. Thinking quickly, Zephyr reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, spherical device. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it down the hallway, where it clattered to the floor. The guards turned, their attention momentarily diverted, and Zephyr seized his chance. He leaped forward, his movements a blur, and dispatched the guards with two quick, silent strikes. Barely pausing to catch his breath, Zephyr continued on his way, deeper into the heart of the facility. He knew that somewhere in this labyrinth of corridors and chambers lay the intel he had come to steal, intel that could turn the tide of the galactic war in humanity's favor. As he hacked his way through a series of security doors, Zephyr's mind raced with the weight of his mission. The human resistance was counting on him. If he failed, their last hope of victory against the alien empire would be lost. But Zephyr had never been one to crack under pressure. He thrived on it. Finally, he reached his destination, a high-security vault deep in the bowels of the facility. With trembling fingers, Zephyr plugged his hacking device into the vault's control panel and set to work. The seconds ticked by like hours as he fought through layer after layer of encryption, his brow beaded with sweat. Just as he was about to give up hope, the vault door hissed open, revealing a small, crystalline data drive. Zephyr snatched it up, hardly daring to believe his luck, but his elation was short-lived. An alarm began to blare, and the facility was plunged into darkness. Vortex, the alien commander, had discovered the intrusion. Zephyr knew he had only moments to escape. With the data drive clutched tightly in his fist, he sprinted back the way he had come, dodging blaster fire and leaping over fallen obstacles. His heart hammered in his chest as he pushed himself to the limit, the alien forces hot on his heels. Bursting out of the facility, Zephyr made a desperate dive for his waiting ship. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, but he didn't dare look back. With a final, desperate lunge, he hurled himself into the cockpit and slammed the hatch shut behind him. As his ship rocketed away from Zeta Prime, Zephyr allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. He looked down at the data drive in his hand, a grin spreading across his face. He had done it. Against all odds, he had secured the intel that could change everything. But even as he celebrated his victory, Zephyr knew that this was only the beginning. The alien commander, Vortex, would not take this betrayal lightly, and with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance, Zephyr knew that the real fight was just getting started. Chapter 2. The Rebel Base. The Rebel Base was a hive of activity when Zephyr's ship touched down. Mechanics rushed to refuel and repair the battered vessel, while Rebel soldiers hurried to unload supplies and ammunition. Zephyr strode down the ramp, the data drive clutched tightly in his hand, his mind already racing with the implications of what he had stolen. He made his way through the bustling base, dodging crates of weapons and weaving between groups of rebels deep in conversation. The air was thick with tension and anticipation, as if everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. As he entered the command center, Zephyr was greeted by the sight of Commander Aria bent over a holographic map of the galaxy. She looked up as he approached, her eyes widening as she caught sight of the data drive in his hand. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. Zephyr nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "Straight from the heart of the alien empire," he said. "This intel could change everything." Aria took the data drive from him, turning it over in her hands as if hardly daring to believe it was real. Then she plugged it into the command center's main console, and a flood of data spilled across the screens. For a long moment, there was silence as Arya and her advisors pored over the information. Zephyr watched their faces, seeing shock, disbelief, and finally, a dawning realization of what they were looking at. "This is it," Arya breathed. "A weakness in the alien empire's defenses. If we can exploit this, we could strike a blow they'd never recover from," Zephyr finished, his heart pounding with the possibilities. But even as they spoke, a shudder ran through the base. Alarms began to blare, and the command center was plunged into chaos. Zephyr and Arya exchanged a look of horror as they realized what was happening. "We're under attack," Arya said, her voice grim. Zephyr was already moving, racing out of the command center and towards the base's perimeter. He could hear the sounds of battle now, the whine of plasma weapons and the cries of the wounded. The alien empire had found them, and they were not holding back. As he reached the front lines, Zephyr saw rebel soldiers fighting desperately to hold back the alien onslaught. Tanks and artillery pounded the base's defenses, while swarms of alien soldiers advanced relentlessly, their weapons spitting death. Zephyr threw himself into the fray, his plasma rifle blazing. He knew that they were outnumbered and outgunned, but he also knew that they could not afford to lose this base. The intel he had stolen was too valuable. For hours, the battle raged, with neither side giving an inch. Zephyr fought like a man possessed, taking down alien soldiers left and right, rallying the rebel troops around him. But even as they fought, he could feel the tide turning against them. And then, through the smoke and the chaos, he caught sight of a familiar figure, Vortex, the alien commander, striding through the battle like a god of war. Zephyr's blood ran cold as he realized that this was no ordinary attack. Vortex had come for the stolen intel, and he would stop at nothing to get it back. As the alien forces pressed in around them, Zephyr knew that they were running out of time. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. The fate of the rebellion, and of humanity itself, hung in the balance. Chapter 3. Desperate Measures. The battle raged on, the sound of plasma fire and explosions filling the air. Zephyr ducked behind a shattered wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that they couldn't hold out much longer. The alien forces were too strong, too numerous. They needed a miracle. Beside him, a group of rebel soldiers huddled together, their faces grim. Zephyr could see the fear in their eyes, but also the determination. They were ready to fight to the last, to give their lives for the cause. But Zephyr knew that sacrifice alone would not be enough. They needed a plan, a way to turn the tide of battle. And as he looked out over the chaos of the battlefield, an idea began to form in his mind. "Cover me," he said to the soldiers beside him. "I've got an idea." Without waiting for a response, Zephyr leapt from behind the wall and sprinted towards the nearest enemy tank. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, but he didn't falter. He could hear the shouts of the rebel soldiers behind him, laying down covering fire as he ran. With a finale, desperate-a-lung, Zephyr reached the tank and clambered up its side. The hatch was sealed, but he didn't let that stop him. With a grunt of effort, he pried it open and dropped it inside. The tank's interior was cramped and dark, lit only by the glow of control panels. Zephyr didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist down on the control panel, and the tank shuddered to life. Swinging the tank's cannon around, Zephyr took aim at the nearest cluster of alien soldiers. He could see the surprise on their faces as they realized what was happening, but it was too late. With a roar of triumph, Zephyr opened fire, sending a barrage of plasma bolts tearing through their ranks. All across the battlefield, rebel soldiers saw what was happening and let out a cheer. Inspired by Zephyr's example, they redoubled their efforts, pushing back against the alien onslaught with renewed determination. But even as they fought, Zephyr knew that it wasn't enough. They had bought themselves some time, but they couldn't hold out forever. Sooner or later, the alien forces would regroup and come at them again, harder than ever. They needed to escape, to find a way out of this death trap. And as Zephyr scanned the battlefield, his eyes fell on a small, battered transport ship near the edge of the base. "Fall back!" he shouted over the comms. "We're getting out of here!" The rebel soldiers didn't need to be told twice. As Zephyr provided covering fire from the captured tank, they made a break for the transport ship, dodging plasma bolts and leaping over fallen rubble. Arya was one of the last to reach the ship, her face streaked with sweat and grime. She clambered aboard, then turned to look back at Zephyr. "Come on!" she shouted. "We need to go!" Zephyr nodded, then turned the tank towards the oncoming alien forces. With a final defiant roar, he unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, tearing a hole in their ranks. Then he leapt from the tank and sprinted towards the waiting ship. Plasma bolts sizzled past him as he ran, but he didn't look back. With a final desperate lunge, he hurled himself through the ship's open hatch, just as it began to lift off. As the ship rocketed away from the base, Zephyr collapsed to the deck, his chest heaving. They had made it, but only just. And as he looked around at the battered, exhausted faces of his fellow rebels, he knew that their fight was far from over. They had escaped, but they were still outgunned and outnumbered, and with Vortex hot on their heels, they knew that they would need to come up with a plan, and fast. The fate of the rebellion, and of humanity itself, depended on it. Chapter 4. The Enemy Within. The alien homeworld loomed before them, a sprawling metropolis of towering spires and gleaming metal. Zephyr stood on the bridge of the rebel ship, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Beside him, Arya and a small team of rebel operatives were gearing up for the mission ahead. They had come here on a desperate gamble, hoping to find a way to strike at the heart of the alien empire. But as they drew closer to their target, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "I don't like this," he muttered. "It's too quiet." Arya nodded, her face grim. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she said. "But we don't have a choice. If we can find a way to disrupt their supply lines, to sow chaos in their ranks, we might just have a chance." Zephyr knew she was right, but that didn't make the knot of unease in his stomach any lighter. As they made their final approach, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. With a final, determined nod, Zephyr led the way off the ship and into the heart of the alien city. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. They moved through the shadows, avoiding patrols and security systems with practiced ease. But as they delved deeper into the city, Zephyr began to notice something strange. The streets were too empty, the buildings too quiet. It was as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, without warning, all hell broke loose. Plasma fire erupted from every direction as hidden alien soldiers emerged from the shadows. Zephyr and his team were caught in the open, exposed and vulnerable. But even as they dove for cover, Zephyr's mind was racing. This wasn't just an ambush, he realized. It was something more, something worse. And then he saw her. Zara, an alien woman, standing atop a nearby building, her eyes fixed on Zephyr. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Zephyr felt a shock of recognition run through him. He had seen her before, he realized. In the briefing files, in the intelligence reports. She was a dissident, a rebel against her own kind. And she was here, now, in the heart of the alien empire. Without hesitation, Zephyr broke cover and sprinted towards her position. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, but he ignored them. He had to reach her, to find out what she knew. As he climbed the final few steps to the rooftop, Zara turned to face him. Her eyes were hard, but there was something else there too. Something like desperation. "You're walking into a trap," she said, her voice urgent. Vortex knows you're here. He's been waiting for you. Zephyr's blood ran cold. What do you mean? He demanded. How could he know? Zara shook her head. There's no time to explain, but you need to know the truth. The alien empire is not as unified as it appears. There are factions, power struggles, and some of us— She hesitated, then plunged on. Some of us want to see Vortex overthrown. Zephyr stared at her, his mind reeling. An alliance with an alien rebel? It was unthinkable. But as he looked into Zara's eyes, he saw something there that he recognized. The same determination, the same fire that he saw in his own reflection every day. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. And if forming an alliance with this alien rebel was what it took to tip the scales, then that was what he would do. Together, they turned to face the oncoming horde of alien soldiers. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time, Zephyr felt a flicker of hope. With Zara by his side, and the power of human ingenuity and determination at their backs, they might just stand a chance. Chapter 5. The Tides of War. The alien installations burned, the flames casting an eerie glow across the night sky. Zephyr stood amidst the chaos, his plasma rifle still smoking from the last volley. Beside him, Zara and a small team of human and alien rebels were catching their breath, their faces lined with exhaustion and grim determination. It had been a grueling few weeks, a blur of daring raids and narrow escapes. But with each successful strike, Zephyr could feel the tide of the war beginning to turn. Vortex's grip on the alien empire was slipping, his power base crumbling from within. But even as they celebrated their victories, Zephyr knew that the hardest fight was still to come. Vortex was growing more desperate by the day, lashing out with increasing brutality against any who dared to oppose him. And now, as Zephyr looked out over the smoldering ruins of the latest installation, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something big. He turned to Zara, his eyes searching her face. "What do you think?" he asked. "Is he ready to make his move?" Zara nodded grimly. "He's running out of options," she said. "He knows that if he doesn't act soon, he'll lose everything." Zephyr's grip tightened on his weapon. "Then we need to be ready," he said. "We need to hit him hard and fast before he has a chance to regroup." Zara's eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "I know just the place," she said. "The central command hub, the nerve center of Vortex's entire operation. If we can take that out—" Zephyr nodded. "It'll cripple his ability to coordinate his forces," he finished. "Leave him vulnerable." But even as they made their plans, Zephyr couldn't shake the sense of unease that had been growing in him for weeks. Vortex was a cunning opponent, and he had a feeling that he wouldn't go down without a fight. As they gathered their forces and set out for the command hub, Zephyr's mind was racing. He knew that this was it, the moment that would decide the fate of the war, and he knew that he would have to be ready for anything. The command hub loomed before them, a massive structure of black metal and pulsing energy fields. Zephyr took a deep breath, then turned to face his team. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "The moment we've been fighting for. The moment that will decide the fate of our people, of the entire galaxy. And I want you to know that I'm proud to be fighting alongside each and every one of you." There was a moment of silence, then a chorus of nods and murmurs of agreement. Zephyr felt a surge of emotion, a fierce pride in the bravery and dedication of these men and women, human and alien alike. And then, with a final determined nod, he turned to face the command hub. "Let's do this," he said, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. "For our people, for our future. Let's show Vortex what happens when you mess with the wrong species." With a roar of defiance, the rebels charged forward, weapons blazing. The final battle had begun, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But as Zephyr led the way, He knew that whatever happened, he would give everything he had to ensure that humanity emerged victorious. For in the end, that was what it meant to be human. To never give up, to never stop fighting for what was right. And as long as there were those willing to stand up against tyranny and oppression, Zephyr knew that there would always be hope for a better tomorrow. Chapter 6. The Price of Victory. The battle raged around them, a maelstrom of plasma fire and explosions. Zephyr and Zara fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they cut a path through the enemy ranks. The rebel forces surged forward, human and alien alike, united in their determination to end Vortex's reign of terror once and for all. But even as they pushed deeper into the command hub, Zephyr could feel a sense of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. Something wasn't right. Vortex was putting up too little resistance, almost as if he was luring them into a trap. And then, as they rounded a corner and emerged into the central control room, Zephyr saw him. Vortex, standing alone at the center of the room, his eyes blazing with a mad light. "Welcome," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." Zephyr raised his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, Vortex spoke again. "You think you've won," he said, his voice rising to a fevered pitch. "You think that just because you've managed to sway a few of my people to your side, that you've somehow defeated me. But you're wrong." He gestured to the screens behind him, which flickered to life with a series of horrifying images. Planets burning, cities reduced to rubble, countless lives snuffed out in an instant. "I have the power to destroy entire worlds," Vortex said, his voice cold and calculating. "And if I can't have this galaxy, then no one will." Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that Vortex was telling the truth. With the technology at his disposal, he could wipe out billions of lives with the push of a button. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Zephyr felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Zara, her eyes blazing with determination. "We can't let him win," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We have to stop him no matter the cost." Zephyr nodded, a grim resolve settling over him. He knew what he had to do. With a final, determined nod to Zara, he stepped forward, his weapon lowered. Vortex's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his hand hovering over the control panel. Zephyr took a deep breath, then spoke. "I'm showing you another way," he said, his voice calm and steady. "A way forward, for all of us." He took another step forward, his eyes locked on Vortex's. "I know you're afraid," he said, his voice softening. "Afraid of losing control, of being overthrown. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can work together, build a better future for everyone." For a moment, Vortex seemed to hesitate, his hand wavering over the controls, and then, slowly, he lowered his arm. "You really believe that?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "That there can be peace after everything that's happened?" Zephyr nodded, a small smile playing across his lips. "I do," he said, "because I've seen it, in the bravery and compassion of my people, and in the hearts of those who have chosen to stand with us. And I believe that you can be a part of that future, if you're willing to try." For a long moment, there was silence. And then, slowly, Vortex nodded. "I'll try," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And with those simple words, the war was over. The rebel forces erupted in cheers, human and alien voices mingling together in a chorus of joy and relief. In the days and weeks that followed, there would be much work to be done. Treaties to be signed, worlds to be rebuilt, wounds to be healed. But for now, in this moment, there was only the sweet taste of victory and the knowledge that a new era of peace and cooperation had begun. And at the center of it all stood Zephyr, the unlikely hero who had brought them all together. The man who had shown that even in the darkest of times there was always hope, always a chance for a better tomorrow. For that was the true strength of humanity, the quality that set them apart from all the other races of the galaxy. The ability to dream, to imagine a better future, and to fight for it with every ounce of their being. And as long as there were those like Zephyr, willing to stand up for what was right, that dream would never die. The galaxy would never be the same, and the name of humanity would be forever remembered as the ones who had brought light to the darkness and hope to the stars.